right, can I have a motion?
Oh, you just reconvene.
No, we have to move into open session. So moved. And I move that we reconvene in open session.
Second.
Right?
All right, roll call vote. Eric?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Susan Fox? Susan Manning?
Aye.
Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it, motion is carried. Okay, next is order of business.
Okay, I recommend that we move discussion item M1, employee health insurance benefits, to follow item I, correspondence and announcements. We have our presentation this evening.
All right, we have a public appearance today. Bethany Kearns.
Do I stand or?
You can come sit at the table. And Bethany, before you started, just wanted to share that 3 minutes is allowed. Okay? Thank you.
Hello, MG Board. My name is Bethany Kearns, and I'm a resident of Cottage Grove. My mother graduated from MG in 1970. I'm from the MG class of 1997. And if all goes well, my children will become MG alumni in 2028 and 2030. This community is very important to me. Although I know that the school board cannot speak to personnel matters, I had to come tonight to state my extreme sadness and disappointment over the fact that Peggy Riley, second grade teacher at Cottage Grove School, was placed on administrative leave with 3 weeks left to go this school year. 3 years ago, Mrs. Riley taught my daughter Emma's first grade class. I was privileged enough to spend an hour each week in her classroom as a volunteer and observe firsthand the truly outstanding nature of her work as an educator. It is incredibly distressing to me that in a day and age where so much is wrong with our world, that something as right as Peggy Riley being a teacher and educator of young people is being taken away from our school district. It cannot be a coincidence that so many teachers are resigning this year from Cottage Grove School, including the truly excellent Nancy Hickson. Shout out to her. And I ask that the board would make sure that their actions and decisions are allowing the school district to retain the best teachers possible, especially in this day and age where educators are leaving the teaching profession in alarming numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, can I have a motion for the consent agenda, please?
I move the consent, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, roll call vote. Eric?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it, motion is carried. All right, next are recognitions.
Okay, the last day of the school year is tomorrow, so we'd like to congratulate the students and each of our staff for all of their effort and dedication they've put into this year. A special congratulations to the class of 2022 for their accomplishments, and we wish them all the best on their future endeavors. All of the district orchestras came together to create a virtual strings festival. In previous years, all orchestra classes have one big concert where they play as individual grades and also as an entire group. This year, the string teachers, Carl Davick, Janet Heineman, Corey Hamilton, and Forrest Evans, got innovative to still have a school-wide concert but make it as safe as possible. And there is a link for you to view the concert recording. The graduating class of 2022 at MG21 had one last hurrah as they hiked the Southern Kettle Moraine together, and we have some photos of that for you. Congratulations to Mackenzie Babcock, who won the state title for Division I 1600 meters at the WIAA State Track and Field Meet. As she's just a freshman this year, we can't wait to see what she and the team accomplish in the future. As each of our schools are nearing the end of the year, they all had their own fun run or field day where students visited a variety of stations to participate in activities like relays, dancing, limbo, chalk, reading, and more. And there are photos from all of our elementary schools for these activities.
All right. There are no correspondence and announcements. Next are administrative reports.
Okay, so I'd like to move ahead to the first discussion item of H1, the employee health insurance benefits. With us tonight, we have our insurance consultant, Al Yeager from USI, who has been working with us now for several years and through our insurance committee, and he will walk us through that background and where we're at with the renewal process. So welcome, Al.
Thank you. So, in terms of the benefits review, in large part, like we do every year, and like we do with area districts and statewide districts, just revisit the balancing act of making a decision in terms of the plan design changes and managing budget. So, first and foremost, you have the cost of benefits versus cost of turnover. I know you told me which one. There we go. So, from the agenda, where we were, where we are, and what's the future strategy, and overall, just how to maintain sustainable benefits offering. So, in terms of where we were, many of you may recall when we were with the ETF plan, we had 365 insured on the plan, 88 single, 277 family. And some of the positives and negatives of the plan, there wasn't a deductible. RX copay was changing from $15 to 20%. That created a fair amount of, okay, we'd like to have more control over this. The contributions were low on the premium, which was positive. All the area HMOs were offered, also positive, but transparency on the cost drivers. So as we were getting over a 9% increase on the cost from the ETF plan or the local state plan, we didn't have an awareness of where it was. We didn't have control of how to make the adjustments, and as a result, we were looking at going from $5.5 million to over $6 million in the health insurance premiums. Where we are 7 years later, our enrollment actually has gone up about 24% since the relatively short period of time. So significant enrollment, hence our premiums over $8 million. And we're now it's projecting for over 6.19% increase, blended increase from Dean and Courts. And some of the dynamics taking place that are noteworthy. First and foremost, especially on the Dean plan, the claims versus premium ratio has consistently been over 100%, which means they're collecting less in premium they're paying out in expenditures. Courts, fortunately, has been running more favorably. It's also noteworthy some of the area districts, especially those with courts, were receiving close to 20% rate increases. So we're seeing a lot of spikes in cost. When we look at hospital labor cost in different studies, we're seeing increases of 33% in their base cost from pre-pandemic. When we look at the contract labor, which has now spiked 500% from pre-pandemic, all significant cost drivers, and somewhat of a perfect storm from what our hospitals are charging, expense, volume, and overall revenue demands. And many of you, or some of you may have read where one of the competitors of the insurance vendors, WEA, has dissolved, and a lot of the perfect storm items mentioned were factors in their dissolving. So ultimately, what do we need to be doing? We need to keep improving our wellness engagement, improving consumerism, promoting the different behavioral health resources that are available. And when we look at where we are versus the peer groups, we see the average deductible in the Badger Conference being at $450 single, $900 family. The average deductible for the Dane County groups, which is probably a more representative sampling of who we're competing, to attract and retain staff, is in the $200 single, $400 family, and the whole range. We're currently at $100 single, $200 family. The whole range is $100 single, $200 family to $500 single, $1,000 family. So that's where we were, where we are, where the recommendation is moving forward. So in large part, keep the premium contribution around the 2% increase range. So instead of taking on the full 6+%, the idea was in the 2% range to help the district meet budget of, allowing the budgeted compensation increase of the 4.7% on the comp. So the more we can control this bucket of cost, the more you can meet that budgetary dynamic. And as far as the adjusting deductible, we had committee meetings, multiple committee meetings. The committee is representative sampling of the staff, board, administration, and we went back and forth in a couple of different plan options. And initially, we were at like a 400 single, 800 family to meet the budgetary dynamics. We're now at a 200 single, 400 family. The committee preferred that over adding office visit co-pays. And so some of the positives out of this are we are the only area district, that is on a high deductible plan that does not have office visit co-pays, which are commonly in the $20, $30 office visit per copay. Meanwhile, keeping the same carriers. So when we look at the carriers in the provider networks, we are the only district that has both Quartz and Dean, and we are seeing very high satisfaction levels on their networks and their providers, and having that provider choice is a significant deal, especially now when primary care has become more and more difficult. If anyone tries to set up an appointment for your annual visit, it's delayed over 12 months or more, and then if you were to consolidate, that makes it even worse. So we're in a good point there. Keeping the contribution level where it is at the 90%. The Dane County norm is in the 88%. We see a range of anywhere from 82 to 90, so we're in a favorable spot there. And lastly, there would be an adjustment on the emergency room and advanced MRI scanning, which is like MRI, PET, CAT scans. So the emergency room would go from 100 to 150, and the advanced scans currently go toward deductible first. Now it wouldn't be a deductible, it'd just be a separate copay when individuals get an advanced scan. So in summary, we take a look at assessing from the view of the staff members, where do we fall? Plan design, the result, we offer 2 plans that are richer or at the benchmark with the recommended changes, still in a good place. Payroll contribution, same thing, at or above the peer group. And you blended overall value, we're in a really good spot. And then in terms of communication, I know it's the next board meeting that you make a decision on this, but once there's a decision made, the communication strategy would kick in terms of educating staff on what those changes are, which for the most part, would help them make sure if they want to add additional flex dollars, et cetera, they would have that opportunity. So board decision on this would be the June 22nd board meeting. And as mentioned, then the future next steps would include engaging the committee for some of the longer term planning, because this is for next year. And the unfortunate reality with healthcare rising at the pace it is, it's not we did this, we're done for 5 years. But those days, unfortunately, are evolving. So some of the ideas that were discussed to build into our planning include, do we look at group health cooperative, because they've become more and more aggressive in the area districts and area employers? Do we consider a health savings account? Do we, it was brought up in the committee, do we consolidate to one carrier? Well, if we did that, we need to really look at a clinic option that some of the districts do to mitigate the concern of access to primary care. So that's really the beginning and end. Any questions or thoughts you may have?
So, can you say more about that last piece, the clinic option? Just explain what that.
Sure. So some of the area districts, what we've done is negotiated with the health systems to provide a nurse practitioner or physician assistant. And if you look at what that specific position can do, it's as much as 85% of what a primary care physician can do in terms of prevention, in terms of acute care. So the idea behind that is, right now when care is getting suppressed and reactionary, and unfortunately, the longer you wait, the more it impacts quality of life and expense. The idea is providing care earlier and more often, and including even some of the checklist of behavioral health red flags, because as many of us realize, stress management has become a major dynamic in school districts.
Thanks.
Questions?
Well, I guess I have one more. So basically, the committee won't Well, the changes are always in effect for the following January, so
Correct.
there's still a possibility. So what you're saying is these will be the goals to look at between now and next fall, next.
The changes that we outline will be January, the prior ones, not this page, the prior
Right.
ones for effective January of '23
Okay.
throughout for the calendar year 2023.
Okay,
The list of looking at whether it's GHC or the HSA or the clinic or consolidation, those certainly take a longer runway
Right, I would
to
think, yeah,
ascertain
okay.
what makes sense or doesn't.
so that'd be the following year. Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
at
Yeah,
earliest,
so
yes.
just so everyone's on the same page as far as the role of the committee and so on. So when we got our initial, it's in the documentation, the initial rates were just obviously not affordable. And so, working with Jared, we determined that, a 2% increase was something that we thought was a reasonable goal to get to. And so the committee's role in this case were to help us determine how we might kind of tweak the current plan to try to get down to that. And I think what Al shared is actually very consistent with what we came back with, 2 years ago as well, with the idea of let's stay away from co-pays, that, deductibles are more manageable, you can plan for them, you can flex them and so on, and again, to Al and his team did a great job negotiating those rates down as well. So later on, Jared's going to present the preliminary budget, and you'll see a line item in there for health insurance, and so keep that in mind when we get to the budget about where this fits in and how important these dollars are in the overall budget, and then we can come back to this a little bit as well at that point. So that will make sure you're really comfortable in understanding the budget situation before you vote on any kind of plan changes.
Okay. Susan?
Dan, what's your, as the board liaison on the committee, I hadn't seen Al's update. This is great. Again, he's done, so all you know, just a superb job of negotiating. He also does, his experience is incredible in this healthcare with these issues, with the costs and the co-pays and the deductibles and the non-pays and all of that. I guess I thought that the update would also go back to the committee for, again, these are the things they ask you for. But they actually haven't, you just sent that out to the committee.
Right, so the committee met twice, and that's where we landed on, look at deductibles and emergency room co-pay, stay away from office physical pays.
But we
So
had
that's
actual-
what we did, and now we have the actual numbers,
Right.
which we have sent out to the committee.
But we haven't met, so actually a committee member sent an email and said, where are we? And then we got a reply with this update. Is there any, just as a board member, I've kind of relied on their input to see how they felt about it. And again, I mean, Al's done a great job, and the committee often feels that way. Are we gonna get committee input on where we are right now? Just discussion, like, yes, this looks good, or could we keep working on the deductible, or, whatever it might be. Because he just goes back and
Yeah,
does
so
it.
no, I'm not going to tell them their committee meeting. It's been shared with them, and so they know that they can reach out individually. That one committee member who had questions missed the last meeting. I'm meeting with them tomorrow.
You're right. Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Oh, great. That's wonderful to hear. Yeah, sorry, he did
Yeah.
miss the last meeting and missed the
Yeah,
last
and the committee is great. They've been with us kind of since the beginning, so they really understand it. And we talked about, in this case, we didn't add new people this year because that history we thought was really important. When we now get into that next phase about possible major changes, we'll look at perhaps bringing some new people on as well to make sure that we got good representation.
I just thought they might have a question or two about, again, what Al always explains is, by the way, you're not gonna get this, and this is the only room you're gonna have in this arena, so that they have a better understanding. They can ask questions, and I just don't know if they had any questions about kind of where we are.
Oh, sorry, Elizabeth.
Oh, that's all right. Just hanging out with my hand.
Oh, look
It's
at
all right.
this one.
Get some good arm exercise. But just to be clear, though, the committee plays like a consultative role, not like a
Correct,
decision-making
they're
role,
advisory.
right? Okay,
Yeah.
so, I appreciate that, Susan, and I think, there's no need to close the loop in that way for questions, because they,
So I want to be
Provided
clear,
they're
is you
wrong.
talk about committees, right? It's really important. This is not a board committee.
Right.
This is an advisory committee to Jared and myself
Yeah.
that we use in order to bring administrative recommendations to the board.
Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of the process.
That makes total sense, and representative of like the staff, right?
Yeah, all the various
Yeah,
staff
because they're the ones
members
who are
are
impacted by the
represented.
changes.
And now I do have a comment, which is only about the committee, because I used to go to their meetings early on, and I was really impressed with their commitment to understand it all. You have a couple teachers who've had significant experiences with the medical system and with the different carriers, and just their knowledge and the fact that they've stayed together pretty much for all this time is, I think, really impressive. They're an impressive group, and so they have been real helpful,
Yeah.
I think. And they've certainly appreciated Al's input, so.
I should say, I said they are advisory to Jared and myself. I apologize. Nicole's part of the team too.
All right, there are no further questions, so thank you so much for your extensive report.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
What's your motion?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, roll through now. So are we doing six?
No, we're going back up.
Okay, yes. Okay, I just have a couple topics I just wanted to touch base on with my report tonight. As you know, tomorrow's our last day with students, so it's a half day for them. And then our staff wraps up on Friday with a half day. So the summer school set to begin on June 20th. We're in good shape there. And we'll give a more extensive report when we have, you know, as they conclude with, participation and so on. You may have seen recently that, one particular area district has some difficulty hiring. We're doing really well. Okay, so we are not going to be turning any kids away. So, yes.
So, I know that Jesse was struggling a little bit with that staffing, and we kind of talked about that recently. So, have we been able to staff the summer school program?
We're finalizing, but we're doing well.
Okay, because a couple of those classes look like fun ones to
Mhm.
teach. Did you see that list?
Yeah. So there's always some final adjustments where students may not always get their first choice, okay, but students will be placed into summer school.
Great, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, and then just wanted a brief update on strategic planning. You'll get a much more detailed update soon. So as you know, as we wrapped up the last time the board looked at the mission, vision, and our pillars, since that time, we had our facilitator, Jill Schrader, meet with our entire administrative team to continue to work on looking specifically at year one objectives, action plans, and measurables. So those are still in draft form. Next week, we have an administrative team retreat where we will further finalize some of those things for first year, with the goal of everything will be ready to go by August. In the meantime, I have a planning meeting coming up with Elizabeth, with TLE committee, and so we'll talk about planning out that committee's work and where strategic planning may fit into that committee's role, as well as then the full board. I would expect we'll likely have a full board workshop at some point as well before the start of the school year. So we'll work on the timing, what might make sense on that. So just wanted to share, we're moving forward as planned, really good work, and excited to share out here soon with our next steps.
Elizabeth?
Question for you, Dan, around hiring for next school year. So we've had a number of positions open. Just curious about how our hiring process is moving along.
Yeah.
It's not a trick question, I
Yeah.
promise.
So, you want to take this under color? You want me to?
It's moving along.
Well, as expected, it's a little bit challenging right now. I think as you all know, the pools of individuals who have gone into teacher education programs in the last few years have really dwindled, and so that results in fewer candidates for positions. And then there's just a lot of competition, obviously, when the surrounding districts were all getting the similar applicants. And as you probably noted on tonight's consent agenda, there are a number of individuals who are looking for other positions outside of the district, and so have provided notice. And that's happened a lot more in this last week, and potentially through this next week as well. Individual teacher contracts are due to Wednesday, the 15th. So we'll have a little bit more of an idea of who will be returning next year, but it's tough. Been through a lot in the last few years, and I think individuals are noticing that there are other options out there for them, that they possess a really desirable skill set that many employers will have. So, well, we would love our staff to return. There could be even additional resignations here as we move forward.
I can add this, in my conversations with principals, all in all, the hires that we've done up to this point, they are very pleased with their hires.
Good.
The challenge is going to be, again, to continue filling those open positions, through the summer, and it gets, as you know, more difficult the longer that we go. But so far, they're excited about the people that we've got coming in.
Is it possible, Dan and Nicole, maybe like towards the beginning of the school year, so looking towards August, to get some trend data on our retention
Yes.
and resignation?
That is definitely something that we'll be putting together, actually specifically as part of our new strategic plan. That was
Great.
one of the metrics that we mentioned that we needed to track and report on.
Great, yeah. I mean, I know it's rough, and it's rough for everybody. It's not unique to us, but I think it'd be useful to have a handle on exactly how we're trending, and thanks.
Further questions? All right, next are board reports. So we'll just go to Personnel Committee, Susan Fox.
Peter's doing
Peter's,
it. They
oh,
good.
that's right.
I was just saying they good.
Peter's gone.
That's
Okay.
that's his
That's
report.
right.
I was giving this report. They're good.
Oh,
Okay, good, okay. Well, Personnel Committee met last week, and we discussed two items that are on the agenda tonight for approval, so you'll be seeing those. I'm happy to say we have reached an agreement with our Mgea for teachers, and that's coming up. And we don't have another meeting set up yet because that's basically, we still have one bargaining unit to finish, but I think they're thinking that'll be later. I mean, the paraprofessionals.
Yeah.
Which will be later in the year. So we'll come up with, we don't have another meeting set, and we're just happy to announce that we've finalized that agreement.
thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
All right, next are possible action items. First is the 2022-2023 school nutrition fees.
Yes, so we are back in this routine. So over the last year and a half, we've been able to provide free breakfast and lunch to all of our students district-wide, regardless if they needed to be on the free and reduced application list or not. However, we've been notified by the USDA that that is not happening, so they have to go back into paid status. Typically, we would come and there's always a small increase or sometimes a reasonable increase each year, and since we haven't done it for the last 2 years, some of these increases do seem a little higher than we typically. Typically, we try to stay around that 5 to up to 15 cents. However, by missing a year, in addition to that, inflation is just going crazy, especially in the food industry. We're seeing food costs and even labor costs increase by 30%. In addition to that, we've actually been able to hire a new school nutrition director in January, and she's been doing a phenomenal job, really taking right off after Dee, who was with the district for a number of years. Some of the exciting things that will be coming out of that is some of the different types of vegetables that we'll be offering in the fall. For example, most of our vegetables that we serve our students are either like baby carrots or things that are cold or steamed because of situations. We're looking at moving to more roasted types of vegetables and starting at that higher level, which we'll classify as fancier vegetables.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
wow.
But then we are actually going to work with the AmeriCorps and bring in some more farm to school and get into the elementary levels and start to do taste testing and introducing the different types of vegetables starting in the fall with the root vegetables. Obviously, in Wisconsin, we have somewhat of a shorter period of time, so we have to be a little unique about things. But obviously, with the rising cost, offering more fresh vegetables, different types of vegetables, it's going to increase some cost to it. There is also that fine balance of we're moving from having a really, really high participation rates because of the free meals to actually communicating with families to let them know. In addition to that, how do you balance by raising fees so you don't have a whole bunch of individuals leave, at the same time making changes to menus, because we know kids, they sometimes be pretty picky about what they're eating, And so Maggie is very focused on like starting out on those vegetable sides, keeping some of the entrees the same, because that's what's driving kids to come, because if it's the pizza or the spaghetti or whatever, and then introducing those vegetables. And then at the main level, at the secondary level, that's where you're seeing a little higher cost. The entrees will start to change, like having Parmesan chicken, introducing fish tacos. Those types of things are ideas that they're looking at doing, and moving back to more scratch cooking, which then also creates higher labor costs and additional costs to food. We weren't able to fully staff at GDS, so even though during our referendum we added 2 additional lines, so the goal would be able to also open that up if we have the staffing capabilities. And so what you'll see at the June 22nd is a compensation plan. Tentatively plan to come to the board for approval for that, which you'll see potentially some increases for school nutrition to be able to carry through. Any questions?
Elizabeth? I have one too. So
Oh, do you want to go first? I feel like I'm like that guy today.
So I guess I have a little concerns for families that no longer qualify for free and reduced, but are having some financial difficulties. Do you offer anything for those families that just cannot afford lunches possibly?
So that's an area that I think we can definitely expand on and partner with our educational foundation. We also do get a couple of families that just make general donations to the district. So we don't ever want to turn away any students to participate. I think our school district has done a great job in the concept of moving away from that stigma that you have to fill out a free and reduced application to qualify for even other things to be waived, even though that might negatively impact us on some of our federal funding around Title I. But I think it's important to obviously encourage that. The other thing, you might have also seen an article that was out in the Herald Independent where they interviewed a food director in Cambridge, where they talk about if a student comes through the line and they don't have money in their account, that food is taken away and they're giving something different. We do not do that. I will make a note that the USDA has sort of tied our hands in the concept of, because our food service program, our school nutrition program has been successful, we've had a decent fund balance, which is important because what we've just went through with the pandemic, we've had to dip into that. Or when we did the MG21 expansion, we were able to buy additional equipment for the kitchens, and we're updating some of the equipment for, instead of moving away from steamers, we can use fund balance for that, and it's self-sufficient, which is the program is self-sufficient. Before we could cover those things, but then the USDA and federal government took away that opportunity. We can no longer use Fund 50 to help supplement that. But I would tell you, anybody that needs the food, they should eat, and the district will figure it out.
Good to know. Thank you. Elizabeth?
2 things. One, I'm so excited about the more farm to school pieces and just the tasting and the trying. And for those of you who don't hang in nutrition research, education nutrition research, the research is really clear that the more kids have exposure to food, but particularly in school, the more likely they are to have a wider range of things they like to eat and eat healthier even outside of those settings. And so it's just it's a good public health thing. So I'm excited about that. I would really love for Maggie, you said, is our new nutrition advisor, her to come and just chat about some of her ideas around school nutrition. I think we don't we talk about it in terms of fees, but we don't really ever sort of talk about the program itself and ways that we're trying to innovate or incentivize kids to participate. And I just would love to hear her perspective on that and her big ideas. A question I have for you, Jared, is do you anticipate supply chain issues again this year, like last year?
Most likely.
Okay. I suppose then if it's local, that helps mitigate some of that.
Yep.
All right. Thanks.
No problem.
Come in for roasted veggies. I'm so excited.
But since the prices aren't up to what the gas prices are, I'd like to move approval of the 2022-2023 school nutrition fees as presented.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? Roll call vote. Eric?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it, motion is carried. All right, next is the 2022-2023 administrator compensation. Susan Fox.
I move approval of the 2022-2023 administrator compensation as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Eric?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. All right, next is the 2022-2023 coordinators and dean of students contracts.
Just as a clarification, the reason these contracts are on, these are all one-year contracts. They contain the salaries you just approved, but there's not, like a teacher contract, there's not that automatic rollover, so we put these on an annual basis.
Okay, Elizabeth?
I move approval of the 2022-2023 coordinator and dean of students contracts as presented.
We'll go a different route. Susan Manning?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Elizabeth? Eric?
Aye.
Do we get a second?
Did we get a second?
Oh, I didn't get a second. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's what you're
Getting
talking.
excited.
Second.
Oh, second. Now I speak.
All right,
Okay,
any further
now
discussion?
we
My
can- now we-
apologies.
Now I
There's
All
You were
right.
confused because I never make a motion, I always
That's
second.
what it is. Eric?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
I don't know.
Andrew?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. Keeping me on my toes.
I'll just never make a
All
motion.
right. Next, we have the 2022-2023 revised extracurricular additive schedule.
Okay, this is just one small change. You just approved a fairly major change a couple months ago, and there's one that I would say is a little bit of an oversight. That dollar amount for the student services coordinator at the elementary level hadn't changed in many years, and I think we realized in looking at that the responsibilities there really are the same as they are in the other coordinator positions. None of us really could understand why. Maybe back in the day there was less staff or something, but we thought this was much more equitable. So the recommendation is the same compensation as all the other elementary coordinators.
Andrew?
I move approval of the 2022-2023 revised extracurricular additive schedule as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? Elizabeth?
Just a quick question, Krista. So there's, or maybe it's a better question for Dan. There are two different salaries in here. So high school, it looks like, versus,
Yeah, in general, all the high schools are a little bit higher, I think, probably just for the larger departments.
got it. Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right, roll call vote. Eric?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. Right, next is the 2022-2023 collective bargaining agreement with Mgea teachers.
I'll move approval of the 2022-2023 collective bargaining agreement with Mgea teachers as presented.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, Eric?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. Next is the 2022-2023 teacher supplemental pay. May I have a motion, please?
I move approval of the 2022-2023 teacher supplemental pay as presented.
Second?
Any further discussion? Eric?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. Right. Next is the 2022-2023 teacher compensation plan.
I move approval of the 2022-2023 teacher compensation plan as presented.
Second?
Okay, any further discussion? Eric?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. All right. Next are discussion items. Employee health insurance benefits.
Chair with the good news for
We
the
need
I
evening.
did that already.
Yeah, we did that.
Next is the 2022 preliminary budget.
Your turn.
It's my turn, and I'm the one that gets to end the night on a positive note. So
I'm gonna pick up my
Right.
cauliflower like it's popcorn.
Right, exactly. As we start to close out our current fiscal year, which ends on June 30th, we start to put together, or pull all of our numbers are starting to come together for our 22-23 preliminary budgets. So tonight is just a really high-level overview, and then at the June 22nd board meeting, you will get a preliminary budget that's still very high level for board approval, so we can move forward as of July 1, it was being our fiscal, start of the fiscal year. We need to be able to start issuing POs so we can have supplies here for when students and staff return in the fall. In addition to that, we do have payrolls that do continue through the summer for our year-round individuals. So I just wanted to start out as just a friendly reminder of what we do is we're a zero-based budgeting district, which requires that everybody starts at zero every year, and then we build the budget up. That includes everything from consumable supplies in our buildings into even staffing. So as we work through it, the board did approve a staffing plan back in, I think, late March, early April, I'll say. And so those are some of the priorities. And obviously, as we work through some of the bargaining with each of our employee groups and we work on compensation, those are all things that start to become in light. And in addition to that, our health insurance, those are all have big impacts to our budget. So as I just mentioned, our fiscal year begins on July 1st. And that day, we also will get our first glimpse of what our state aid estimate is going to look like. If you remember, we won't really know what our state aid amount is until October 15th. And that really doesn't give the district any new funds. So I don't try to come out and give you an estimate of what it's looking like, because really what it's doing is it's taking our revenue limit and saying this is the total amount of money that you can collect based on enrollments. And then they subtract out whatever we're going to get from the state, and the remaining amount is what's passed on to our taxpayers, which obviously is important. We don't obviously want to tax out our families, but they're, as districts continue to work through their budgets and spend out their funding, equalization aid is based on expenditures that were happening, and so really they're just pulling what we've submitted to them through budgeting processes, and so we know that it's going to change throughout the summer. School starts September 1st. Our third Friday count is September 16th. Enrollment is a huge driving factor of revenue for the district. And if you recall, we've experienced a little decline in our enrollment due to COVID. And when that happens, that affects our 3-year rolling average. So when we do get a new resident to the district, that resident only counts as a third because it takes them 3 years to be fully counted in our district. And when we look at our revenue limit per student is around $11,000. So we don't get that full $11,000 the first time that they show up. In addition to that, there's one snapshot for the count date, which is the third Friday when we talk about revenue limits and building the revenue that will actually is what should support your expenditures and your budgets. In addition to that, there's obviously lots of moving parts. We know that we're monitoring, especially in the Cottage Grove area, some housing developments, apartment developments, and some of those apartments are not going to open up until November, early November, late November. So that might be an interesting thing that happens to the district next year. The students might not be enrolled on the third Friday, and they might come a month later or something like that. So we might not necessarily see that enrollment right away. We do also have an enrollment count on the second Friday in January. And what that does is that's what helps feed our equalization aid, or this aid estimate that we will have received already in July 1 for the following year. What's positive about that is because equalization aid from the state is trying to level the playing field. So if we have more students, they divide that by our property value, and if we have a high property value, they think that our property taxpayers can pay more of it. And so that's why you always hear, when I've given presentations before, that we're a negative aided district. So we actually lose state aid, and which then pushes the burden to our property taxpayers. On September 12th, you actually will have your annual meeting budget hearing, and that will be the first time that the new Director of Business Services will be able to present to the public the budget that they have been able to put together over the summer. Continuing to still be a moving part because it's before the third Friday. We know who's, for the most part, in the building. We still don't know what our equalization aid amount is going to be. We still don't know what our October 1st property values are going to be. So there's still lots and lots of moving parts. And so that's what I talked about. October 1st is when the property values are released. That's what will determine what our mill rates will look like. Obviously, mill rates don't drive how much money we get as a school district, but it's definitely a very upfront in front of our taxpayers. And so if they see that their mill rates are going up by 10, 20, 30 cents, that equates to that they're paying potentially more. But that's not always the case due to the fact that their municipalities are always making property value adjustments and stuff. Then October 14th, you'll get your final equalization aid amount that's released. And then on October 26th, the board will have to approve the final budgets. And just to remind you, our fiscal year has started on July 1st. So we're 4 or 5 months into it, which has always been the case. That's the system that has been in place. But it's one of those things that is just sometimes weird for individuals that are not involved in school finance. The other part of it is that even when we don't know what our enrollment's going to look like in September, we're also issuing teacher contracts by law that have to happen in May and return by June. Not that I ever want to lay off to individuals, but you're sort of committing, extending your hand, saying that we need this, and then if all of a sudden you don't get that kindergarten class that you anticipated, you have an individual that's obviously we can use someplace else. But those are some of the things that the system has developed or has in place for us. The 22-23 school budget is the second year of the state budget. And I just want to point out a few things. I want to drive this home to everybody. And I drive this home because I think it's very important, because this is why communities are going to referendum, and you're seeing it over and over and over. It's because we're not getting any support from the states. So if you recall, there was $0 that came from the state in revenue limits. And when we talk about $0 in the revenue limit, typically what happens, I had mentioned earlier that we have, say, a per pupil amount of $11,000. And we always have ongoing costs. We always have salary increases, benefit increases, operational cost increases. And especially right now when we're dealing with outrageous inflation, and it's just, supply chain and cost of things continuing to go up, we received $0 new dollars, which means that our $11,000 has stayed the same. It's stayed the same that way for the last 2 years. And what we were told is that we need to use our Astro Funds, which is one-time funds. And when you use one-time funds, use it this year, say $400,000. Next year, that $400,000 plus you have to find another $400,000. So that's $800,000. It's just a continuous structural deficit that continues to happen. They did put in the state budget an increase to equalization aid, which is just property relief, which is positive, but it does not give us more money to put in our classroom for our students, to put towards salaries. They did give us additional special education funding, and when I say that, they went from like a 28% to a 30%. And it's an approximate, because it's not a, so when they do that, they give an allocation of, say, $1 billion. It's always a year behind. So what we're spending currently this year is what we'll get reimbursed on next year. So if there are more special ed expenditures in this fiscal year for all of our public schools, that 30% won't happen. It might go down to 29. And when I think, so for every dollar we spend in special ed, we only get 30 cents back from the state to help support the students that have sometimes obviously the most need and the most attention, and might require some one-on-one attention, some specialized, that does cost more. And as I referred back, our Joint Finance Committee, when they put together the state biennial budgets, they had indicated that school districts were receiving tons and tons of federal money, and then that's how we were to balance our budgets, even though that federal money was coming with purposeful reasons to spend it. Mental health, learning gaps, stipends for staff, additional training because things were moving to virtual, health staff, PPE, all those types of things. It wasn't meant to use to balance your budget to pay for those normal operational expenditures that go up. So I just listed out here the 3 different funding, but I'll talk a little bit more here in detail on this next slide. So there was 3 Astro Funds. And I know I had talked about these before, and I know Elizabeth had asked sort of like, what are the grant periods? So I wanted to circle back and incorporate that into this so everybody had that. So Astro 1, and this is also when we talked about when we as a school district have tried to tear down those barriers and try to tear down those silos and not tell every family that you have to fill out a free and reduced application. So yes, we had some reduced Title I funding, but we've also saw that we've received less federal funding because we've done that as a district. And that's okay, because we're trying to do the right thing for our families. But unfortunately, the federal government and the process that they have put in place, so you might hear some school districts have received additional funding or more funding than we have. And part of it's because of the Title I funding program. So Astro 1, we received that $82,000. We received that actually in March of 20. We spent that pretty much immediately. That was during COVID. We were shut down. We were providing additional virtual learning. We needed to put some staff training, which was majority of it going to teach additional hours for our teachers to learn about virtual learning and how to deliver that in Canvas. And then we spent some of that on PPE. $65,000 of that was spent in 2021, and then the remaining $15,000 we were just finished out because some of that virtual learning happened at the end, so it overlapped 2 fiscal years. This year we're completing Astro 2. Astro 2 was $429,000, and how we spent that, technically we have until September of 2023. However, since we received $0 for this year's budget, we needed to obviously utilize it, and I would say that we haven't utilized 100% of it to balance our budget. We've tried to maintain the concept that we need to keep the integrity of the ESSER program, but at the same time, we couldn't just use 100% of it for things that were very specific with what the federal government wanted. But we used it with PPE. We've been able to up our health room staffing. So prior to the pandemic, and I think Krista would always advocate that we always should have been at the same level that we're at now, but the pandemic has created this. Every building has a full-time, either the school nurse or a health assistant. And so we've been able to fund that through Astro 2. The other part of it is subbing has become a larger thing, so we've been able to hire what we call building full-time subs, so they're on work assignment for us. They're not just called in when we're needed, they're permanently in our buildings for the school year. And as of right now, we're tentatively and looking to continue that into the next school year. In addition to that, there's also staff training. So we've continued to offer additional hours for our staff to continue to, modify their curriculum, understanding that, how, just because when COVID hit and we purchased Canvas, we knew that everybody wasn't just going to learn it and understand it right away. So we need to continue to support those teachers in that staff training. And then we moved to Astro 3. Astro 3 is the larger one, and that's probably been the one that's been in the news the most. When Astro 3 came out, the states had to submit a plan, joint finance. That's when they decided to say, oh, well, wait a second here. We're not going to approve these plans. We're going to make school districts that were not in session in person get less money. That's when we had to start counting every single minute that we had students in the building and submit that. So they worked through everything. We got our final allocation. We're going to get $2.7 million to do that. We technically can spend that money up till September of 2024. And so as we look at the revenues and expenditures, we do plan on spending half of it next year and then the other half the following year. And the idea is that what we're going to be spending it on is obviously continuing our health room staffing. Summer school staffing, obviously that was one of the conversations that happened earlier tonight. Our staff are burnt out. Yeah. And so we've been able to offer some additional initiatives to get them to sign up to do that, which is going to cost some money. If you recall, the staffing plan included a number of guidance counselors, a number of social workers, and those go to meet the needs or the requirements of ESSER 3 for mental health and obviously assisting students recovering from the pandemic. And so that ESSER 3 will help fund some of those. And then continuing to provide staff training. I mean, let's be honest, we can never provide enough staff training. So that's the overview of our ESSER 3 or our ESSER funds. And then we're going to start with budget assumptions on the expenditure side. You did approve tonight a couple of different employee group compensation increases, and So this amount here, the $1.6 million is all staff compensation increase because the CPI is at a 4.7%. This also includes fringe benefits. When I talked about fringe benefits, we're looking at Social Security, Medicare, everything. So every time you increase someone, but if you pay someone a dollar more, you're gonna have to pay the federal government, or the state and federal government a little bit more too. So I incorporate that in. So this is the amount of pot of money that we're coming into and looking at being able to distribute. When we talk about a budget assumptions, we know that they're not always going to be 100%. We made some improvements for supplemental pay. We know some of those individuals unfortunately have already submitted the resignations, are leaving after the board had already agreed to something. So that's going to be a potential savings there, which obviously will then, at the end of the day, when we look at the expenditure side or the revenue side, helps balance the budgets. We will continue to work over the summer to look at other efficiencies of how to do this, but so we're looking at a $1.6 million increase in staff compensation. Our health and dental increase, so Al was here. I am putting in the budget assumption that the board would ultimately approve the recommendation that is the 2.19%. The one thing that, if you recall from the health insurance, is in literally 7 years, we've grown our health insurance budget by $2 million. I'm a huge supporter in looking at total compensation. I think that's very important. But what we're seeing is we're also the only school district in Dane County that offers a dual choice. Definitely support that. I benefit from it. However, when other school districts or other municipalities or other private businesses decide to not offer those or go to higher deductibles, or we do a 90% the district pays towards health insurance and they're doing an 85%, we see more people coming to us, and then our budget becomes a little bit more supplementing other people's budget. Not that that's a bad thing, but when we talk about not getting new additional funds from the state, that becomes a budget challenge for us to continue. The other part of it is benefits are very important, but what we're also continuing to hear is people with the market that's happening is they're looking at their salary. And so if their salaries, if we're not being able to compete, it's really total compensation, but the pie doesn't get any bigger. So if you're gonna put more money into benefits, your salaries are gonna probably be lower. And that's hard sometimes for Nicole and her team to explain that to young individuals because they're not seeing it in their paycheck. We also know, going back to staff compensation, that 4.7 is a large percent, but it's inflation. You know, it's not going to just necessarily go into staff's savings account, or they're going to be able to go buy and do something. Like literally, it's groceries, and
Gas.
you know, a letter that Dan's going to be sending out later today is going to address that. Like, we recognize that's a huge thing. Staffing needs, so when we talk about the staffing needs that the board approved, and we talk about adding additional kindergarten section, some social workers, guidance counselors, but we've also had some sections that we've decreased, you know, so at Winnequa, based on student enrollment, 3rd grade went down a section, but 4th grade went up. So this is truly a net increase to the budget. So we're looking at a potential $815,000 in new staffing cost. And that's also me speculating where Nicole's going to be able to bring them into the salary schedule, and are they going to choose a family plan or a single plan? So there's a lot. So that's the other assumption. Like, you know, obviously I try to go on the higher side, so it's easier to share good news about, hey, our budget came in lower than we had anticipated. But so that's another area. And then the two other areas that will really be affected by inflation is utilities and transportation. So yes, we have the solar project that's going on at the high school, and when this 6% talks about the solar project savings of 50% of the usage is paying for it. So it's not a savings to the district's overall budget. There's actually, I would say, $1,000 difference right now. But we're looking at a potential 6% increase in utilities. And then transportation, because of the fuel costs, it's just crazy. Like typically, so how our transportation budgets are set up is we have a percent increase for routes, and the district is required to pay for the fuel. And what's happening with fuel and diesel, right? They're just skyrocketing. So normally this would have been a 2.5%, 3%. We're going to 5%, and 5% might be too low. But so right now we're looking at new expenditures moving into the next school year, and the next fiscal year is just a little over $3 million. So now let's look at the revenues that need to help balance that out. We talked about a little bit about revenue limits. So right now we're anticipating a resident growth of 25 students. So typically, when you get 25 new students, you should be able to take 25 divided by 3 divided by 11,000. Well, the problem that has happened is revenue limits, our 3-year rolling average has dipped down, which means that there's this thing called hold harmless. So DPI for 1 year will keep you at the same revenue limits. And so we've used up that first one and we still haven't got above the peak. So again, so literally we need to get 28 new residents to get $11,000. So right now there is no new money. In addition to no new money coming from the state, our revenue limit is not helping us. Now, next year, as long as we continue to see this enrollment growth for residents, then you'll start seeing some more revenue come back in off of the revenue limit, even if there was no per pupil increase. When we talk about open enrollment funding, $550,000 does not mean that we're adding a whole bunch of new students. It's a combination. The board approved in January a number of spots. In addition to that, we already received, so this year I think we're going to be collecting like $3.9 million in open enrollment revenue. Each year that per pupil amount does go up, even though our revenue limit might not, that amount at least does. So this is a combination of students returning, their per pupil amount going up, in addition to that receiving some new students. And then also netting out any students that leave. We're still at that point of netting out way more students that come into our district than leave. We're well over, we're under 100 students that leave our district through open enrollment, which is phenomenal, especially when you look at the other schools in Dane County. Transportation aid. So because transportation aid always follows who really rides the bus and always a year behind. I remember last year was COVID, it had some unique year, not a full school year, so we did not receive our full $100,000 that we typically receive in transportation aid, even though we have a very large transportation budget because of the uniqueness of our school district. We should be going back to that aid amount that we've been getting, but this was a normal year, somewhat of a normal year. Special education aid, we're anticipating receiving an additional $200,000, and that's going from that 28% up to that 30%. Now, if it happens to go up to 31 because statewide special ed costs went down, then we might receive some more. If all of a sudden it goes down below that, we might see a little less. When I talk about other revenue, we obviously, the positive part of seeing some inflation is that bank interest is starting to go back up. So some of the areas that we have where we're able to invest money for a short period of time, we're able to see increases there. But then we also have potential increases in some of our title funding that might come through. And so this is, typically between $75,000 to $100,000. The other part is student fees. We did not raise them this year, but we did not reduce them. So depending on the number of families that actually enroll and where they fall, we probably will see a little bit of increase there. So then really, that's where I stopped at originally, and I took what are our new expenditures, minus what we've collected, and then that pretty much backed us into where will we have to somewhat use for ESSER 3, which we knew we needed to do at the minimum because we've identified social worker, guidance counselor. So we'll be using $1.3 million of one-time funds to balance that, plus we'll be dipping into our fund balance of just shy of $800,000. Now, I did put a note at the bottom. If we would have just received the $150, which is a fairly low part of our per pupil, we would have received an additional $473,000, which would have not solved the entire problem. However, it would have been able to help reduce the amount that needs to come from fund balance. When I talk about fund balance is not just cash sitting in an account. Literally, it's a snapshot as of June 30th. Every single day our fund balance changes. So when we have a payroll, it dips down. We actually cash flow borrow $5.1 million to make sure that we meet all of our bills because of the uniqueness of when we receive our funding. Majority of our funding comes from property taxes, which don't start as well until January. So we go from July to January, and then state aid starts coming in. Now, one change of the biennium budget, we used to get our last aid payment in the next fiscal year. For the fiscal year we just finished, we at least now get our last aid payment in June of the fiscal year that we're at. So small steps. In addition to being able to use fund balance during the pandemic, obviously there were some unique situations that we were able to put larger amounts of funds into our fund balance. Typically, we're within 1% of what we budget, which means that, you know, we might be overspending a budget by 150 to 200,000, or putting 200. So it usually balances its way out through over a number of years. So the first year we were able to put in, you know, just shy of $700,000 into fund balance, and then when the full pandemic was in full force, it was like $1.3 million, which obviously is now coming into our financial planning. So when we have to use our ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, that fund balance will be then come into play to help do that. However, at the same time, it's going to create a pretty large fiscal cliff for you. So I just want to put some
I go back to that because I just have one quick question about the revenue limit. So you saying, Jared, that residential enrollment increase of 25, if that was 28, we would get?
So if it hits 28, we'll start to net out more money. So if we got to 28, we would get $11,000, and then it just keeps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, if we got to 28, we'd just get 11,000 per student?
We would 11,000 total new revenue limit authority, and then it would start to continue to creep up because we have to make up what we've lost during COVID.
Okay, so is there like a cutoff date or time when that number would have to be?
Our third Friday on September. I just lost the dates.
Yeah.
Right.
So
They have to be in attendance on that day
Got
to be
it.
counted towards.
So it's possible that would be 28.
Yeah, we could be at 40.
Yeah.
Cross my fingers, it's 50. Yeah. Right, so.
September 16th.
So in closing thoughts for you, as you obviously, there's no approval tonight, but we're really looking at, there's a lot of moving parts of the budget developments. Obviously, one of those moving parts is we continue to monitor what prices are going to be. We continue to work through staffing. We continue to work at what compensation is going to look like. So tonight was the first step. We still have a lot of work to do before June 22nd to bring the last groups to the board. Going back to enrollment is a significant revenue driver. Hate looking at kids as dollar amounts, but that's the system we've been put into as well. So we won't know that until the third Friday in September. And then also this past year, 21-22, the fiscal that we're coming to, we also use one-time fees or funds of ESSER 2, and then the governor's office was actually able to use some of their funds, and we got an additional $470,000. So really, this past year, we used $850,000 of one-time funds that we have to make up as we move forward, and we're looking at different ways to take care of that. Also, the assumptions for expenditures and revenues are for new amounts. Obviously, we know what we've spent this year. We use zero-based budgeting. We can have some flexibility with that, but we also know that we're not reducing staff. And so some of those have to pay for those types of costs. Obviously, it wasn't an extensive expenditure lift. We know that we had our capital budget that you approved back in February, which was $650,000. So there are going to be areas, and then the other part of it is as we work through the hiring process, there are going to be people that we might have to come in higher than we had budgeted for, and so that's where we can save that. This is the second year of the state budget, so we also know that there's going to be a governor's race in November, and we know then that will be the next set of what finances might look for school districts. Once again, we're receiving no new money from the states. And so at this time, now that could change. Obviously, there was a large surplus that went back to the state. Joint finance could come back in session after school starts and say we're going to give $100 to schools. Probably not going to happen, but I just
appreciate your optimism, Jared.
So there is that ability to do that. We've also heard from legislators that yep, we have to use your one-time money now, but on the next buy-in, we're going to make up for that. Remind you that when we use one-time money, okay, you can come back and say we're going to give you that $200 again, but we need $600 to make up for the $400 that you've made us use through Astro Funds. So it's not just, we're going to give you $400. That's not making up what you made us use. And so just the last thing is the budget is being built on a lot of one-time funds, which is not something that school districts typically do. I would never advise you to put salaries into fund balance. However, as a school district, you're not making these, unfortunately, choices to do it purposefully. You've been told by the Joint Finance Committee, by our legislators, that this is how you're going to continue. Yes, you can literally say we could balance our budget by giving absolutely no increase. But what I will tell you, every other school in Dane County is doing a 4-7. You're gonna have individuals that are leaving. You're not gonna have the morale of your staff. We're here for students, and as Dean Bold would always say, we buy people's time. And so that's really the majority of our budget is 80% of salary and benefits is the personnel. So we have to commit into that. Yes, we could easily say that we're not gonna add any positions, but that means class sizes are gonna go up. And the other part of it is we all know that student mental health is on the rise due to the pandemic. So the positions that are being added around school counselors, social workers, school psychs, those are all to support the situations that are happening in the building. But anyway, so that's pretty much the overview of what is to come on June 22nd for the preliminary budget. Any questions? Like I said, I'm going to end the night on a lot of positive notes.
I have 2 unrelated questions. So one, you talked about the growth in Cottage Grove and hiring. So have you anticipated, hiring based off of all of the growth that's happening?
So what we've done is when we've looked at our enrollment, we have staffed and have sections based on our class size goals. And so the board has class size goals and class size ranges. The goals are closer in the middle, so we do believe that we can absorb those, the growth of the students coming in, unless it's just way, way, way high. But we technically believe that we can take a significant amount of students and meet in most of the grade levels and meet the growth there. But it is sort of like a dartboard we're trying to figure out, because typically the kids come and they're spread out between grade levels. However, there's been a time where I've been here where they all came in 6th grade. It's like, what? Like, what are the odds of that?
Yeah, so I think, Jared and I work really close together on that. I think we generally, if we get, 5 to 10 students per grade, we're staffed for that. If they all come in 1 or 2 grades, like Jared said, then we'll have to make some adjustments.
Yeah.
And we won't know because November is kind of.
Yeah, and so we continue. They'll continue to monitor it over the summer, and obviously principals are very active and because when a student enrolls, they don't just enroll at the district office. They enroll at the district office, the buildings, because they need to be assigned a homeroom classroom. The tricky part of it's going to be is if we have families that are moving into the district and think that they should wait until a week before school starts. That is going to be a problem because we're just not aware of them. As they come in over the summer and we see that the class is approaching, obviously we can be looking at, okay, do we add a section? Now, is it easy to add a section in the summer? I understand the principle. It's not easy because it affects a lot. It affects, obviously, your homeroom, but then it affects all your related arts. You might need to move other kids around to different classes because you don't want, say your existing 7 sections being at 23, and then this section comes in only at 10. You want to level it out as well. So it's a lot of extra work that happens at the building level by the principals. So that's the concern, is that we just don't know about them until like the week before school. In addition to that, there might be transportation needs, which is a whole nother, like adding people to routes is not a simple process. And we also know there's a shortage of bus drivers. So, obviously we want the growth. We're looking forward to it. We're excited to see the growth that's, the buildings that are happening in Cottage Grove, and even what the city of Monona is doing. Because when you look at and talk to the consultants that have helped us with enrollment, they've always told us that Monona should be flat. And Monona has not stayed flat. And that's the forward thinking of the city council, the administration of the city of Monona, of looking at how do we turn homes around to bring younger families, and being a destination where families want to come. And so I think we're getting posed to be in that right location where Cottage Grove is starting to see some more of the affordable housing coming. Obviously not as much as we would like to see, but it's moving along, and so that should also bring some additional students. And depending on what happens with Amazon and the different types of job opportunities, the tricky part is the village of Cottage Grove doesn't have mass transit. So unless you have transportation back into one of the neighbor or urban areas for your job, or you have a job in Cottage Grove, that still limits, because when you look at our enrollment over the last, I'll just say the 12 years, we've had really unique enrollment spikes. And we don't have like factories, we don't have like in some of the areas of the state where you see, transient and people are coming in for like, if they work at the turkey store and they're coming in for this season and then they move to a different community. We don't have that, but yet sometimes when you chart our growth, our residents are like, 1 year we're at 30 and the next year we drop it down to 10, or go negative. And so, but that's not the typical enrollment that we're seeing in other communities in Dane County. And I think part of it is the mass transit, the jobs, the number of affordable housing that are in some of the, in the other community in our school district.
Well, mass transit is going to be coming soon in Cottage Grove, because nothing says mass transit than a Dunkin' Donuts and a basketball. So it's coming.
All right, my other unrelated question was in regards to transportation costs. Does the rising cost of fuel impact transportation?
Yep, so right now, that's what we're anticipating. For the most part, the majority of the costs impacting to the budget is coming from the fuel costs.
Gotcha.
So I have a question, Jared. So this financial cliff, right, that's coming, in order to avert this, we would need most likely additional funding from the state to make up for that. And you were saying that would be about $600 per student. So we're talking for the state, that would be an additional $500 million to what they're already funding about?
Pretty much.
Okay. I just want to understand.
And so that,
the numbers,
like when I throw out that $600,000, that $600, that gets us to cover the cliff.
Right.
And then you need to do the new
Well,
executive.
right, so that's in addition to matching what they already do, so.
Yes.
Yep. Right, which is what, 3.1 billion or something?
And I think they had 3.5 billion that went into
3.5
their
billion, so, okay.
rainy day.
Powerball and Mega Millions.
Just saying.
So
You're
we
gonna have to
could-
train your
we could-
predecessor.
I was just gonna say, we could it's possible to avert the financial cliff. Our legislators
Yes.
and lawmakers can do that by making a decision for education.
Correct. Investing in the future.
Trying to explain that to them all year.
I just want to
Yeah,
understand it.
figures.
so.
Yeah.
And you recall, I mean,
Choices they make.
we're currently in the second year of the operational revenue of the 3.7. So though, I mean, there's obviously different areas that you need to do, but that's the problem, is that the entire community can't pick up the cliff. We need the state to step up and invest in the future of our students.
All right.
Thanks, Jared.
Further questions? All right, thank you, Jared.
It's very thorough, even if it's.
Always.
Yeah.
It's very good, thank you.
All right, next are future meeting dates. They are listed in board docs.
Can I just make, what I forgot to add in there, but I did send in my latest memo, a reminder that the Dane County Equity Consortium next week, Wednesday,
Can I still sign up for that?
you can, yep, the
Can
Executive
you
team.
resend that, or I think I
Sure.
looked for it once and I couldn't find it.
Be glad to resend it. So
Thank you.
until, they're taking application, or whatever, registration is till Friday.
Okay. Oh, that'd
So
be
the
great.
one thing I want to, and they said it's okay to use guilt with your board members. We have students presenting. So they really would like to see a good turnout.
Well, I planned to, and I couldn't find it.
Yeah,
I
so
was
it's
looking
Dane
for
County
it.
Equity Consortium, so it's all the school districts and all the school board members in Dane County. And being, it says being facilitated by Percy Brown and with students and at the Forest High School. So I'll resend that out.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Elizabeth.
Can I give us some?
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right,
I think our
motion is carried, meeting is adjourned.
registration in front.
Actually, I thought, you sent it.